The man whose hard-hitting speech shook the Indian Parliament, through his words, Professor Bimol Akoijamna has become the voice of the voiceless. Let's have a look at his life journey.
വർഷമൊന്നു പിന്നിട്ടു മണിപ്പൂർ ഇങ്ങനെ വിലപിക്കാൻ തുടങ്ങിയിട്ട്. സർക്കാർ സംവിധാനങ്ങൾ ആകെ തകർന്ന് അക്രമത്തിന് അറുതിയില്ലാതെ ഒരു നാട്. കലാപത്തിലെ മരണത്തിന്റെയും നാശനഷ്ടത്തിന്റെയും കണക്കുകൾക്കപ്പുറം ഒരു രാജ്യം ഒരു ജനതയോട് ചെയ്ത മാപ്പില്ലാത്ത തെറ്റായി മണിപ്പൂർ വാർത്തകളിൽ തുടരുന്നു.
I would keep quiet the moment the Prime Minister opened his mouth and a nationalist party says that Manipur is part of India and we care for the people of that state.
ഡോക്ടർ ബിമൽ അക്കോയിജ 1,00,000-ൽ പരം ഭൂരിപക്ഷത്തിൽ ബിമലിനെ ജയിപ്പിച്ച മണിപ്പൂരി ജനത പലതും അതിലൂടെ പറയുന്നുണ്ട്. JNU പ്രൊഫസർ കൂടിയായ ഇന്നർ മണിപ്പൂർ MP-ക്ക് പറയാനുള്ളത് കലാപത്തിനപ്പുറം കരളുകൾ ഒന്നാകുന്ന ഒരു കാലത്തെക്കുറിച്ചാണ്. രാജ്യം കാതോർക്കുന്ന ആ ശബ്ദം നമുക്കും കേൾക്കാം.
With great respect, I invite Professor Bimol Akoijamna to the stage.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to be in Kerala. You know, I keep on saying that there is an eternal connection between Kerala and my home state, Manipur. If you're not aware, the sobriquet, the nickname of my state is called Little Paradise. So quite obviously, Little Paradise have to have some relationship with God. He brought us together more closer. This is, I think, my 4th visit to this state in my life. Recently, I was there in Kochi for an international film festival where, incidentally, one of my film was premiered. I also into filmmaking before I joined. I'm into too many things in my life, I suppose. And it so happened that after winning the Lok Sabha election, as part of the new UGC rule, I'm still continue to be a teacher in JNU, and, which is in my bone marrow. It's my primary identity. What I shall do it briefly is just to lay out some issues for the rest of the country and for my audience to understand what is the issue that we face. I know it's a long history, and I'm aware that many of the people in this country is not aware of what happened in the Northeast. That's also primarily because of the exclusion that I mentioned in my first speech in Parliament, which has been part of my writing, academic writing or otherwise. Northeast is being included in India through a process of exclusion. And I have written this borrowing from an Italian thinker. It is inclusion by exclusion. That's the process through which Manipur or the Northeast become part of India. It is excluded from Indian history in just the way as the European would have excluded Africa and Asia and the rest of the world as, in Hegelian sense, people without history. And they were anthropological subjects. It was only after Battle of Plassey, for instance, that India finds its place in the history of the world within quote, dominated by the European lens as a part of history. In a very similar sense, you will see that I know as an academic for the last 31 years of my life, that's peculiarly what the post-colonial scholar says. There is a continuity between the colonial and the post-colonial in South Asia. And a classic example is what the Northeast is to India. It is on the same principles, or it has been allowed for so long in that part of the world. So in this sense, like many issues in this country, what happened in the Northeast and Manipur in particular in the present crisis is a legacy issue. It has a lot to do with the practices and ideas injected by the colonial forces. Just as we know how census was introduced in this part of the world, and classifications of people and how identities get reified based on those colonial practices. We are all familiar with that. What happened in Manipur is, unfortunately, there was a forced topographical and categories were injected by the colonial British. We should know that right from Kashmir to Uttarakhand to Nepal and Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh to Nagaland to Manipur till Mizoram, and all the way to Arakan ranges and even the Andaman Nicobar Island, was created through a collision of the Indian plate and the Eurasia plate, sometimes like 50 million years ago. That's the elevation, we call it Himalaya, like most South Asian communities. It was through a particular classificatory scheme. They were seen as if they are discrete, opaque boundary identities. That's how the colonial practices have done in South Asia. The same thing happened in Manipur. What they described was that those people in the central Veket tribes, they forget that in their forms of life, as well-known scholars like Sudipto Kaviraj and others will remind us, they have a relationship in this country. It's a fuzzy community. We all have relationship. They marry each other, they go to war sometime together, they will fight with each other at times. But it was created as if these are two different sets of people. One called civilized, it's a typical European way of looking at the Mediterranean region as a civilized people, and the Nordic people as the savages, barbarians, and so on. That kind of classification was injected by the Britishers, particularly around 19th century. And they further consolidate, once they took over Manipur, two sets of subjects. They complemented this division of the population in terms of a topographical false mapping. You think about it, how many of you will think that Nainital and Dehradun are two different places? They are part of the Shivalik region of the Himalayan ranges. Dehradun is briefly around 640 meters above sea level, and Nainital is around 2,000. They are part of the Himalayan ranges. Mark my word again, 640 meters. Dehradun is a hill station. Nainital is a hill station with 2,000 meters. Imphal is 800 meters above sea level, higher than Dehradun, and it is treated as if it is like a plain. And Churachampur, the hub of the conflict where this tribal group reside, is barely 900 meters, a difference of 100 meters. But in the topographical mapping, they think that it is the same relationship like Allahabad would have with Nainital, or Guwahati, which is 50 meters above sea level, with Kohima, the then Naga Hills, which is around 1,500 meters. They have falsely mapped out what is essentially a part of a mountainous region as a hill and the plain. So it complemented this one, and this trouble has continued. That's why they said hills should be separated, valleys should be separated, forgetting that this is topographically and ecologically a compact state, intimately tied geographical formation with interrelated communities. To think of it, what you called Kuki tribes, their language, according to linguistic classification, is part of the Kuki-Chin linguistic family, of which my language, Manipuri, the first Indo-Mongoloid language to be recognized in the 8th schedule of the Constitution, is also part of in the mid-20th century. And traditionally, those people in the Central Valley, there are a lot of valleys in Manipur, don't get confused, but it is, I'm talking about the Central Valley in the middle. They are part of what we call it Manipuri Vaishnavite. We are quite like the Japanese in some sense, because you follow your actual ritual and thought processes. Your institutions are a mixture of, just like the Japanese, between the traditional Shinto religion and Buddhism. Meitei's religious practices are majorly part of the larger, what you can call it, Vaishnavite tradition and the pre-Vaishnavite religious belief. We practice both of them. I'm wearing one of them. This is our demi-king god, which is the protector of the polis, the state. In the post-colonial period, classifying one as ST, another as non-ST. And then again, they introduced laws in 1960s, and they classified the upland as hills and the Central Valley as plain. Interestingly, in Nagaland, which is also part of the mountainous range, there is a place called Dimapur, which is their commercial hub, which is part of the extension of the Indo-Gangetic plain called Brahmaputra Valley, which is considered to be. Manipur was an 11-gun salute state. Kashmir and Hyderabad were 21-gun salute state. Cochin and Travancore was also one of those gun salute states. So Manipur came, but unlike other princely states, Manipur had a constitution of its own. The king was reduced to a constitutional monarch. But the government of India bulldozed those constitutions and the assemblies. That's the dissatisfaction led to the armed movement in Manipur. Many of the so-called Sioux groups of these cookies have never fought with the Indian state. They have never fired a single bullet, so to speak, against Indian armed forces. Yet these are armed groups. The government of India maintained a relationship and suspension operations. You must understand why some people demand the scrapping of these Sioux. It is these practices that they was burst into flame for two reasons. I think I'll just cut short with this. Because of these tradition of separate and practices various kinds of ideas, there is a movement for Jalingam, which is supposed to be an independent country comprising of what they call it Kuki-Chin groups in Bangladesh and Myanmar, which is a Chin state, neighboring Mizoram. So it encompasses a large group of these areas, and there is an ethno-nationalist mobilization. And part of the population in Manipur's southern part is implicated in that movement. So many of them imagine Kuki state within India as some sort of a halfway home to maintain their own autonomy within their structures. So they will side with this side, Indian state one time, another side, this side. So that gets complicated. And the Indian state continued this move, this particular crisis, they said is part of that, to mobilize forces, to create alternative civil society forces. In fact, it has been done now. You have armed groups who have never heard of before. There are groups which are much more active today, and that neutralizes and balances some of the traditional forces. So this is part of the crisis that we have. Two more issues. The Golden Triangle, notorious for its drug and poppy, has UN reports suggested that it has shifted its gear towards the eastern side, out of Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar. Myanmar became the hub of that one. It has spillover in Manipur. That is why bordering Myanmar, you have massive forests and hill areas of this game. But when I say minor, remember that when you're dealing with opiums like this, even a minor would mean thousands of crores of rupees. And according to some observers, when I had a conversation with them, what they did was that they asked these Sioux groups in 2017, 2022, it's all in public domain, you Google it and you'll see. These Sioux groups, these armed cookie groups, that is the issues. The road ahead is that I would suggest two things. Indian government and all of us must take a firm stand against any demand of a political structure based on communal, exclusivist, sectarian ideologies. That's the fundamental. You can have demand for administrative reforms or structures based on what the State Reorganization Commission had said to empower the people for participation in the governing on their life, and also for the effective and efficient delivery of goods and services. There must be an administrative rationale rather than an exclusive communal identity project. Indian government, whichever party holds it, and for the rest of us, if you don't do that, this country will not survive. It will open a Pandora's box, That's why State Reorganization Commission way back in 1956 have said it very clearly. It cannot be done on these communal identities, but it should be founded on administrative rationale for effective and efficient delivery of goods and services. And what should I say, still, I expect the government of India to assert its own authority, its read, as Weber would suggest, that you must claim the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force. And that's what state is all about. When the state surrenders, you have warlords roaming around with guns. Afghanistan is a clear picture of that. We know what is the idea of a failed state when the state does not assert its authority. But I've told you this government is complicit in its silence. Allowing this violence to go on for so long clearly tells you that something is there in the mind of this government, and we must be careful about and alert to this move of the government. But still, I will ask the Prime Minister, as my leader Rahulji says, please visit. Call all your MA. Remember that all the leaders of this community's leader and that community leaders popping up as the savior of respective communities are all from BJPs. The one who is asking for defending Manipur is also in the cabinet. The one who is demanding for separation also in their cabinet. And the game plan, 200 plus people have lost life. Lawlessness, economy is destroyed.